I hope everybody's having a great Wednesday evening. I sure do miss seeing everybody in person, and even though this may not be the way we exactly want to have a Bible study, at least we're still being able to get into God's Word together. So I just want to give you some encouragement as we study God's Word. If there's anything that you need, let me know. Let someone on our staff know. We'd be happy to help you in any way that we can. I want to start out by asking a question. What do you fear the most today? Do you fear getting the coronavirus? Do you fear dying from it? Do you fear maybe a loved one dying from it? Do you fear losing your life savings during this time, or losing your job, or maybe just running out of toilet paper? A crisis has a tendency to bring out the fear in us. One of my favorite movies is a movie called 13 Days, and it's a movie that's set in the time of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. And the main tagline for that movie was this: "You'll never believe how close we came." Now, I wasn't born until 1964, so I wasn't alive during that crisis. But as I was watching the movie, one of the things that struck out in my mind was the fact that there was a long line to get into this Catholic church. And so I asked some people that were alive during that time, I said, was the movie realistic? And they told me that it was, that particular Sunday, there had never seen so many people in their church as they did that particular week. Isn't it amazing how quickly we turn to the Lord in times of crisis? I do remember when 9/11 happened. And what I saw after that event was that the churches were filled with people, that people were coming back like I had never seen before. I remember having a prayer vigil that we had at the town hall in Fountain Inn. And I was amazed at how many people came together in our community to pray together. We had one at our church that Wednesday night, and I couldn't believe how many people showed up on a Wednesday night to pray. Today, we're in the midst of another crisis, the coronavirus, the COVID-19. And I have seen an incredible desire that people are having for God. And our church, as well as other churches, are trying to find ways that how do we meet that desire? How do we keep people involved in learning more about who Jesus Christ is and more about who God is? And I know our church is doing several things. Every day I put out a daily devotional, and we've been going through 2 Samuel and just kind of seeing what God's Word has to say to us. EJ is doing some Facebook Lives every Monday and every Thursday at 7 o'clock for Celebrate Recovery. I'm also doing this Wednesday night Bible study at 6:30 every Wednesday. We're still continuing to do our service, taping that, putting it out on Sunday morning at 9:30. Andrea has been doing some things. If you noticed on Facebook this week, they were putting together some Easter baskets for the children, and they were having a drive-by where you could come by and pick those up. Greg is still working with our youth and doing some Zoom meetings so they can still meet together. Our Sunday school classes are meeting on Zoom as well. And so we're trying to find ways to help meet that desire that people are having for God and still being able to study God's Word together the best that we can. And I'm seeing a lot of other churches do that same thing. I think it boils down to this. When a crisis comes, people need to know that God is in control. And so we seek Him. So how should we respond to external threats in our life? How should we respond to that? I think the first thing is you got to clean house. Let me share with you from 1 Samuel chapter 7, verses 2 through 6. It says, "Time went by until 20 years had passed since the ark had been taken. Then the whole house of Israel began to seek the Lord. Samuel told them, 'If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, get rid of the foreign gods and the Asherahs that are among you. Dedicate yourself to the Lord and worship only Him. Then He will rescue you from the hands of the Philistines.' So the Israelites removed the Baals and the Asherahs and only worshiped the Lord. Samuel said, "Gather all Israel in Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord on your behalf." When they gathered at Mizpah, they grew water and poured it out in the Lord's presence. They fasted that day, and there they confessed, "We have sinned against the Lord." And Samuel began to lead the Israelites at Mizpah as their judge. Let me kind of summarize that. For 20 years, the Israelites had lived without the ark, and the ark was a tangible symbol of God's presence. And so, because of that, they had assimilated other religions into their lives. And something that happened very seriously, that the people's relationship with God was shifting. They were seeking God in this time. And Samuel, being the representative of God to Israel, noticed that there was some sincerity among the Israelites. And so he commanded them to get rid of every single symbol of foreign gods that they had in their possession and fully dedicate themselves to worshiping God and God alone, and that only He would rescue them from the Philistines. Because, see, the Philistines were causing the Israelites to live in fear. They had been enemies for a long time, and so the text says they began seeking the Lord. What about you personally? Was there a time that you began to seek the Lord earnestly? When my wife and I got married, we had kind of gotten away from church, and all of a sudden, about 11 months after we got married, we were expecting our first child, and so we had our first child, and during that process, we said, you know what, we need to get back in church because we want our kid to have what we had growing up. And so it caused us to earnestly go back and seek the Lord, and it's what got us back in church and changed our lives for the better. According to this passage, what did Israel have to turn from before they could return to the Lord? Samuel gave them three things. They needed to return with all their heart. They needed to get rid of all other gods, and they need to worship only Him. Do you think that's a good warning for our nation today? To return to the Lord with all our hearts? What would happen if our nation, all of us, returned to the Lord with all of our heart? To get rid of other gods. And what are our nation's gods? Money, certainly. Sports and sports figures, entertainment and actors and actresses and singers, and the freedom just to do whatever we want to do whenever we want to do it. Have you noticed that God has taken away our idols in this nation and worship only Him? I believe this country, we've taken worship for granted. Many people come when they have nothing better to do, and we've taken it for granted. Have you ever had a time in your home where things begin to just collect clutter? And you find yourself constantly having to move things just so you can walk through a room or down a hallway. And finally, after a while, you just stop and you go, that's enough. I've had enough. Before I do anything else, I am going to clean up this room, or I'm going to clean up this hallway. It's time to clean house. And I think that was such the case in Israel's time. The nation was cluttered with idolatry, immorality, and indifference towards God. Does that sound familiar? And Samuel's message to the people was, it's time to clean house. Have you gotten away from God? Have you gotten off track? Do you need to return to Him? Is it time for you to clean your house? See, Samuel challenged the people to clean up their lives, to get right with God, to remove the idols in their life. And I think our nation needs to take those words seriously today. The second thing of how we should respond to external threats in our life is we need to overcome our fears. Looking in verses 7 through 11, it says, when the Philistines heard that the Israelites had gathered at Mizpah, their rulers marched up towards Israel. When the Israelites heard about it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. And the Israelites said to Samuel, don't stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, so that He will save us from the hand of the Philistines. Then Samuel took a young lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on behalf of Israel, and the Lord answered. Samuel was offering the burnt offering as the Philistines drew near to fight against Israel. The Lord thundered loudly against the Philistines that day and threw them into such confusion they fled before Israel. Then the men of Israel charged out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, striking them down all the way to the place below Beth-kar. So the people had gathered at Mizpah, and they had gathered at Mizpah to rededicate their lives to the Lord. But the Philistines thought when they had gathered together, what they were actually doing was preparing to go to war against them. I want you to think about the state of mind of the Israelites at the beginning of this passage. They were afraid. But did you notice the change of their state of mind at the end of this passage? At the end of the best passage, their state of mind was the complete opposite. So what happened to change it? God showed up, and they knew that God was on their side. Many people are living in great fear today at this time. We're wondering how many people are going to die. When is God going to stop it? And our state of mind is living in a state of fear. What's it going to take for us to overcome that fear? I think we need to realize that God is still God, and that God is in control, and that God can use this time for good. I really believe that when this pandemic is over, people will be rededicating themselves to the Lord, that churches will be full all across this country, that people will not be taking church for granted anymore. But you know what else I expect to see? I think there's a lot of pastors out there that are just burnt out. They're poured their lives into the ministry and experienced frustration and burned out. They've lost their passion. They've lost their fire. But you take a pastor out of a pulpit for a while, and they will regain that fire. And I think you're going to see pastors coming back to their pulpits with the passion they had when they first got into the ministry. And I believe that this country is going to see such a great revival of people coming back to the Lord, something that we haven't seen since the Second Great Awakening. Imagine what happens when that fire and passion returns to the pulpits, how that's going to change this country. And then the third thing is remember how God has helped you in the past. Looking at verses 12 through 17. It said, Afterward Samuel took a stone and set it upright between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, explaining the Lord has helped us to this point. So the Philistines were subdued and did not invade Israel's territory again. The Lord's hand was against the Philistines. All of Samuel's life, the cities of Ergron to Gath, which had been taken from Israel, were restored. Israel even rescued their surrounding territories from Philistines' control. There was also peace between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel judged Israel throughout his life, and every year he would go on circuit to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and would judge Israel at all these locations. Then he would return to Ramah because his home was there. He judged Israel there, and he built an altar to the Lord there. How has God helped you in the past? 2 weeks ago, my wife had 5 bypasses. And as we pondered and we looked back at that, she had been in excruciating pain for around 6 weeks. And as we kept going from doctor to doctor to try to figure out what was going on, nobody suspected that it was a heart problem. And so we had even gone on a weekend conference to Hilton Head. And as we look back, we are so fortunate that she didn't have a heart attack. And they finally did discover what the problem was, and it took care of the pain. I know God saw me through my heart problems a few years ago. My daughter Ashton was premature, and she was born 8 weeks early and had some complications from that. But you wouldn't know it today. He's helped me financially in the past. He's comforted me in the past when loved ones have died, when my dad died, when my My niece died in an accident when she was 14, when my sister died last year of cancer. It says in this section of the text, Samuel commemorated God's protection with an Ebenezer. That means stone of help. What reminders have you set up to remember what he's done in your life? I wear a necklace around my neck to remind me every day. It's got a cross to remind me every day of what Jesus did for me. I wear a ring on my left hand to remind me of the woman that God gave me. I wear a ring on my right hand that I got when I was in Israel with my name put in Hebrew to remind me of the greatest trip that I ever went on, a trip of a lifetime that God granted, where I could go to the Holy Land and walk in the same places, in the same steps that Jesus did. I carry a coin that's called the armor of God, and I carry that, and as I carry that coin, it reminds me of our men's brotherhood, because we pass those out to the men in our brotherhood, and it reminds me that I know there's a group of men that have my back, but it also reminds me of the protection that I have from God as well. And it's a reminder. I think it's good practice to have some tangible things that remind you of what God has done for you in the past. So we don't know what the future holds, but we do know who holds the future. Folks, Jesus Christ is our Ebenezer. And he takes us from the pit of sin, and he sets us on a sure foundation. And if we dedicate our lives to God and learn to trust him in the times of trouble, we will see his hand in every situation. You know what? He has seen you through in the past, and he will see us through in the future. Folks, we don't need to worry about what's going on today. God has it in his hands. He's in control. We just need to trust him. So I hope you have a great evening, and until we meet again, may God bless you.